Do you know this guy right here, Bernard Arnault? He's the richest man in the world and the CEO and the chairman of luxury fashion brand Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. On the outside, his company is iconic for their flamboyant purses and bags coming in at thousands of dollars each. But on the inside, there's nothing flamboyant about the company or Bernard whatsoever. This makes sense because Bernard didn't found a single one of the dozens of fashion brands that he owns today. He actually got his start in his family's construction business, which gave him enough money to buy out the parent company of Christian Dior. From there, he would engage in constant corporate raiding, hostile takeovers, and brutal backstabbing to build the empire that is LVMH today. They've bought out everyone from Tiffany and Bulgari to Sephora and Hermes. In fact, here's a list of all the brands that LVMH currently owns or has owned in the past. With each and every one of these brands, Bernard followed a very simple formula. Buy a substantial predatory stake in a business of your liking, promise that you're not looking to take over the company, engineer internal strife amongst the existing team, and finally, make them an offer they can't refuse. In the meantime, he's also been keen to ensure that he doesn't get overthrown himself. One of the first things he did after taking over LVMH was acquire enough shares to form a blocking minority, which means that no one can successfully challenge his power over the company. While toxic, this strategy has played out in Bernard's favor way more often than not. That's why he's the richest person in the world. But there are a few notable exceptions, as was the case with Gucci. Bernard approached Gucci just like he did with any other brand, but little did he know, Gucci would put up the fight of their lives, and this takeover would end up being one of Bernard's most public failures. So here's how Louis Vuitton got humiliated trying to take over Gucci. Taking a look back, the bloody battle for Gucci dates back to early 1999. The CEO of Gucci, Domenico De Sole, had just put in a stellar year with Gucci. He had nearly doubled the stock price from $32 to $56, and their star designer Tom Ford was making heads turn around the world. Gucci was no longer the struggling business, desperate for a bailout that they were just 5 years ago when De Sole took over. But De Sole was just getting started. Yes, he had successfully rescued the company from bankruptcy, but he wasn't just looking to save the company. What he wanted to do was make Gucci a fashion giant that was feared and respected around the world. And last year's stock performance was exactly the momentum that De Sole needed to make this evolution. But there was one fear in the back of his mind: Bernard Arnault. For the past year, rumors had gone rampant that Bernard was looking to take over Gucci. On the outside, De Sole would put on a brave man facade that he wasn't worried about Bernard or his predatory hobby. But internally, De Sole was petrified. He had only been CEO for 5 years, but he had been involved with Gucci since the early 1980s, and this was by far his life's greatest work. So you can bet that De Sole had no intention of giving Gucci up to some French wolf just so that he could add it to his endless list of brands. As a result, De Sole was keeping a close pulse on the situation. He would regularly call Gucci's investment banker, Morgan Stanley, and inquire if any outsized purchases of Gucci stock had been made. In fact, he would make one such call on this fateful day, January 5th, 1999. But something was different today, as De Sole felt that they were finally out of the woods. Instead of inquiring about any large purchases, he would proudly tell the banker, "It looks like we're in the clear now." But it was only hours later that he would get a frantic call from his assistant. Louis Vuitton's president, Carcel, who was also an old friend of De Sole, was on the line. But almost instantaneously, De Sole could tell that Carcel wasn't calling to get drinks or discuss the fashion industry. Carcel was calling to inform. He was calling to inform that LVMH had acquired a 5% stake in Gucci, and that the news was going to go public later that day. He went on to assure De Sole that Bernard's purchase was nothing but passive, and that he wanted the two brands to work together. But knowing Bernard's history, De Sole knew that this was complete and utter BS. He would hang up the phone and rush into the London Gucci office, calling everyone that he could think of. He called Morgan Stanley, he called their anti-takeover specialist, and then his heart sunk. The anti-takeover specialist that they had been working with forever just happened to have a 1-year-long sabbatical starting in just 1 week. At this point, Desol lost it. He hung up the phone and hollered, "If Arnault wants the company, he can have it. I don't give a blank. I'll just go sailing." Though Desol had a little outburst there, he by no means meant what he said. Though he did love sailing, he wasn't gonna sit back and let this French tycoon bully Gucci. So he would call back Morgan Stanley and ask to get in contact with the boss of his former anti-takeover specialist. This got him in contact with a man named Michael Zowie, who was the head of Morgan Stanley's European Merger Advisory Group. Normally, such a defense would have been under his pay grade, but Zowie was more than happy to help because he had his own vendetta against Arnault. You see, he had previously represented the Guinness Brewery in their own fight against LVMH just a few years ago. And that fight didn't go as well as Zowie had hoped, so this was his chance to get revenge. He would come over to the Gucci office in a matter of minutes, bringing with him Morgan Stanley's defense. But when they opened up the file, they would be met with another bombshell. It turns out that the anti-takeover specialist wasn't just going on a sabbatical, but he hadn't done jack in terms of creating a defense. In fact, the entire defense consisted of just 2 clauses. 1, Desol was allowed to resign from the company in the event of a hostile takeover. And 2, Tom Ford was also allowed to resign if someone acquired more than 35%. Zowie couldn't believe it. He would call up his employee and yell, "Where is the effing defense? What have you guys been doing all this time?" To this, the employee didn't really have a response, and it wouldn't be surprising if this guy's sabbatical turned into a permanent one. But that didn't really help Gucci's case. As the Gucci CFO observed, "You guys are toast." For Gucci, there was really only one way out of this. They would have to find someone else to buy a large enough stake in Gucci before LVMH took over. This way, LVMH wouldn't be able to acquire a majority, but this was much easier said than done. Here's the thing, Gucci was worth $8.7 billion, and while this was cheap money for Bernard, for everyone else in the fashion industry, this was a serious business, and they couldn't just make an investment decision overnight. So Desol only had one option, try his best to stall Bernard, but Bernard had no intention of moving slow. Just a few days after his initial purchase, LVMH would acquire another 9.5% stake in Gucci, and within 10 days, Bernard would own over a quarter of the company. In the meantime, Desol was desperately calling every CEO in the fashion industry, pleading for them to invest in Gucci or, at the very least, not sell off any stake that they may already have. But call after call, Desol was politely refused. For all the other CEOs, making Bernard into an enemy was simply a road they didn't want to go down. Given that no one else wanted to help Gucci, Desol knew that there was only one more person to ask, Bernard himself. He would set up a meeting with Bernard at Morgan Stanley and request that he slow down his buying and let Gucci stay independent. Bernard was apparently open to the request, but in return, he wanted 3 full seats on the Gucci board. It became clear to Desol right then and there that Bernard wasn't here for a compromise. He was just looking to grow his control in Gucci through another avenue. So Desol would of course reject this offer, but this simply led to Bernard upping his stake to 34.4%. Bernard was taunting Gucci. Just another 0.6% and Tom Ford could leave with no repercussions. Despite Bernard's charming personality, this was no friendly deal. This was war, and it was now do or die for Gucci. Desol was done begging everyone in the fashion industry. Even if someone wanted to help, Bernard would probably just destroy them as well. So what Gucci had to do was fight fire with fire, and after consulting with a slew of lawyers, he knew exactly what to do. He was gonna dilute LVMH's stake into oblivion. You know how companies like to buy back their shares to increase their stock price? Well, they can do the opposite too and issue a bunch of shares. For obvious reasons, companies avoid doing this unless they really need to raise money. Gucci didn't need money. but they could issue a crap ton of shares to dilute Bernard. Bernard, on the other hand, was well aware of the strategy, but he thought he was protected. You see, American regulation specifies that companies can't dilute more than 20% of their company without a special waiver. This is obviously to protect shareholders from over-dilution. So Bernard figured, worst case scenario, if Gucci tried to pull this stunt, he'd have to pay another 20% for the company. No big deal. Also, there was no way Gucci would get a waiver just to stop an acquisition. Waivers are reserved for truly dire situations, as in, this company will go bankrupt if they don't dilute more. Gucci was obviously not in that position, so Bernard was quite confident in his own position. But it turns out that Bernard's lawyers had missed out on some fine print. You see, that 20% rule only applied to American companies. So technically, Gucci was legally allowed to dilute themselves into oblivion. Of course, this would hurt all Gucci shareholders, but given that LVMH was the biggest one, they would be hurt the most. And with that, they all started printing shares left and right. Little to say, Bernard was truly pissed, and he would decide to leverage some fine print himself. According to Gucci's own bylaws, anyone with a stake larger than 10% could request a special shareholder meeting. At this meeting, Bernard wanted to nominate a new person to the Gucci board and essentially stage a coup. Things were getting heated fast, and the Dassault needed a power play to get the upper hand. While printing shares could stall, it didn't solve the issue of not having a large stakeholder that could block out LVMH. Gucci's resilience and willingness to fight LVMH did pique the interest of more potential buyers, but no one was willing to pull the trigger just yet. But Dassault didn't have time to burn, so he decided, if I can't find a shareholder, I'll just create one. I'll give all the shares to Gucci employees through a massive employee stock ownership plan or ESOP, and that's exactly what he did. In late February of 1999, Gucci issued 20 million shares to their employees, which effectively diluted Bernard from 35% down to 25%. For the first time, Bernard could feel Gucci slipping from his grips, but the fight was far from over. This brilliant move from Gucci turned heads not just within the fashion industry, but the business world as a whole. But while this was a great victory for Gucci, Dassault didn't let this distract him from his end goal, which was to escape the clutches of Bernard by finding an investor. Gucci's ability to hold their own against one of the most ruthless businessmen in the world gave potential investors much more confidence. And this is when a man named Francois Pinault would enter the scene. Dassault admits that he had no clue who Pinault was, but not wanting to ignore any leads, Dassault would agree to meet up with Pinault in early March. It turns out that Pinault was one of France's wealthiest businessmen and owned classics like Christie's Auction House, Converse shoes, and Samsonite luggage. At the meeting, Dassault would give his classic speech about how he and Tom Ford saved Gucci from bankruptcy and how they were now trying to save Gucci from yet another demon. Pinault was impressed with the first meeting itself, but after a second meeting that included Tom Ford, Pinault was sold. He too wanted to move fast. In fact, he wanted to move even faster than Gucci, as he didn't want to lose the company to LVMH. So he gave Gucci an ultimatum: finish the deal in a week or I'm out. Dassault still had an inkling of doubt if this was the right choice, but Tom Ford was confident that this was the way forward, which gave Dassault the confidence to agree to a multi-billion-dollar deal in a matter of hours. By that evening itself, Dassault would put together a confidential team of investment bankers and lawyers all working to complete this deal. Speaking of the deal was that Dassault would issue another 40 million shares of stock, which Pinault would purchase for $75 per share. This would cost a total of $3 billion and give Pinault a 42% stake in Gucci, while simultaneously diluting Bernard down to 19.6%. This would essentially block out Bernard from being able to acquire a majority stake, but the deal didn't stop right there either. You see, Pinault had another ace up his sleeve. He suggested buying YSL and letting Dassault and Tom run that company as well. This itself was an extremely generous offer, but what made it even more satisfying was that Bernard had just passed up on buying YSL a few months ago so that he could focus on getting Gucci. And now, Bernard was gonna lose out on Gucci and YSL. Desole and Tom would of course take Pinault up on this offer, and in the blink of an eye, Gucci would go from trying to escape Louis Vuitton's clutches to insulting Louis Vuitton. Bernard would of course throw a tantrum. He would sue to block this deal and offer to buy the entire company for $8.7 billion. But now, Gucci had the upper hand, and they weren't gonna tolerate any more of Bernard's antics. And eventually, Bernard had no choice but to keep his minority stake or just sell it off and move on. And that's exactly what he finally did in late 2001. In the end, Bernard's hostility actually ended up working in Gucci's favor. Not only were they able to escape LVMH, but they were able to find someone that was willing to back them and truly form a mutually beneficial partnership. We should also mention that Pinault made an awesome deal, as Gucci now accounts for 60% of its company's revenue and 70% of its company's profits. It did end up working out just fine for Bernard as well, as he's now the world's richest man. But with that being said, that doesn't change that he was shown up and outsmarted by a small company that had just recovered from near bankruptcy. And that's how Louis Vuitton got humiliated trying to acquire Gucci. Did you know about this corporate bloodbath? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you're glad that Louis Vuitton got a taste of their own medicine. And of course, consider checking out our Discord community to suggest future video ideas and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.